Hi, I'm Richard Tang, CEO of Zen Internet. Welcome to my channel and welcome to the first interview of 2025 with Paul Waugh, MP for Rochdale. A very warm welcome to our HQ in Rochdale, in our hometown. Paul?
Great to be here. I'm really pleased to be here, Richard, as a fellow Rochdalian. It's a pleasure to be here. As someone from Rochdale who's founded such a fantastic company, it's brilliant to be here.
Thank you very much. Let's dive straight in. You assumed the MP office in July 2024. So since then, what are your priorities?
Well, we've got almost like a business plan for Rochdale. My MP's office, my staff all know what the clear priorities are. They start off particularly on housing, social housing. I was born and raised in a council house in Rochdale. There's not enough decent, affordable homes in Rochdale. There's a massive waiting list, 20,000 people, 22,000 people on the waiting list, which is shocking. Thousands of kids growing up in that instability. They have their parents trying to get stable work. It's really hard for them if they're moving around all the time. It's terrible for the kids when they're moving from school to school. They build a set of friends and then have to move next thing, because the landlord is either wanting them to move or evicting them, or it's simply not that affordable for them. And we're spending a lot of taxpayers' money on this temporary housing as well. So housing is a big mission of mine, particularly social housing. Obviously, you've got to have housing in the right places, as we know in Rochdale. There's no point building on green fields with these executive homes that are basically not much use to anyone, particularly if there isn't the infrastructure in place for the schools, the roads, the GPs. We've got to make sure that if we are building, we've got the infrastructure around them. That's why a lot of brownfield development in and around train stations is really important because it boosts economic development, makes sure that people are near all the transport hubs they need to be. So housing is massively important. The Seven Sisters tower blocks, which are iconic bit of Rochdale, are lying mostly empty, and that's a scandal in my opinion when we've got such housing need. So I'm trying to work with Rochdale Borough Housing on making sure we get a solution there that doesn't demolish any of those blocks and gives people a warm, decent home that parents and kids really deserve. So housing is really important to me. I'm really pleased that the government has invested another 350 million.
And why are they empty?
Well, it's shocking because I think the owners, it's not the council, the Rochdale Borough-wide Housing, feels that they're not up to standard. In other words, they've not got the right insulation, not got the right windows and doors. That's fine, but get on with refurbing it, and it'll cost several million to do. But and unfortunately, a project collapsed recently they were involved with to get the money. I'm trying to pressure ministers to make sure we can do whatever we can with the mayor to make sure those blocks are brought back into use. And it could be, in my opinion, a brilliant green project. It could be a classic green retrofitting project. They're structurally very sound, those tower blocks. They're based, there are 7 of them. They're based on the 7 Rochdale principles of the Co-op movement, believe it or not. That's why they're 7. I know people in my own family who've lived there. I know people who live there now who feel sort of under siege slightly, that they're being slowly encouraged to leave, when actually they should be encouraging to refurb them. So housing is a big priority. The NHS, another massive priority. It's one of the reasons I became an MP in the first place. My wife's a midwife in the NHS. She came home every night saying that, we simply don't have enough staff. We're being cut to the bone. We can't do our job. So that's one of the main reasons I thought, right, I've got to do something about that. We are committed to cutting the waiting lists, making sure that we invest, but also that we reform the NHS. The British public don't just want money pumping into something, particularly if they don't see any change. They want productivity improved, they want reforms, they want it streamlined, they want to make it patient-focused. That's what we should be all about, and I'm pleased that we are heading in that direction. Only this week we had some really good stats on how we've got 2 million extra appointments, 2 million more than were anticipated because we're investing in staff, paying staff properly. Retaining and recruiting staff is absolutely crucial for the NHS. So that means at the end of the day, it's not about just big figures and statistics about millions of appointments. It means, can you see your GP without having to ring up hour on end? Can you get your granny getting a hospital appointment? Can you get your kid a hospital appointment? If we can deliver on that, that's really, really important. Another particular focus on for me, though, the NHS locally, is trying to get a midwife-led birth centre into Rochdale. You and I, Richard, born in Rochdale. Sadly, Birchill Hospital is long gone. The infirmary doesn't do birth. There's no maternity unit there. So what I want to do is try and give mums a choice, which is, you can have a home birth, you can have a hospital birth, can you have halfway house, which is a pop-up birth centre, which is affordable, but also meets the demand locally from all different communities to have a birth that's not at your home, but isn't in hospital, and you feel a bit more relaxed. So I'm working hard on that. It's a big challenge, believe me, particularly given when money's tight. So NHS is really important. Schooling, obviously, we're trying to do our best to get a new secondary school in Littleborough, which is much needed, and particularly for special education needs provision too. Again, it's a big issue in Rochdale, as in everywhere else in the country. If I can help persuade ministers to unblock some of the blockages, it's been in the system for like 2-3 years now in Whitehall. So there's a plan for a new secondary school, and it's desperately needed. It's just about making sure it's delivered. Again, it's complicated, some of the issues involved, but it's my job to say, all right, it might be complicated, but we need political will to deliver it. So schooling is really important. Educational access and excellence is really important for me, not just in academic sense, but the vocational sense. I was at the Rochdale Training Awards last week, and it was fabulous to see so many apprentices working in so many different areas, whether it's engineering, which we're really brilliant at here, or social care, or education. And there was a real breadth of experience there of all these teenagers, and not just teenagers, people are coming back, mature students who they've got a family and they want to improve their lives for themselves and their family. They want to train. And there's some really inspiring stuff at those awards, which I'm really pleased about. Again, as a government, we're investing a lot more in apprenticeships. We're reforming apprenticeships. Employers complain a lot about the fact that English and maths, the requirements for apprentices were just outdated. There's too much red tape. So we've listened to employers, remove a lot of that red tape. So as a result, we're hoping we're going to get 10,000 more apprentices every year, which is great for business and great for the employees. So apprenticeships, vocational training, I'm really, really big on. But also academic excellence, I'm really big on. I went to a normal school, Old Hill, a comprehensive school, managed to do well and get into Oxford University. I want more kids to aim high and broaden their horizons. It doesn't matter what university you go to, as long as you can fulfil your potential. And that's the same for the apprentices, but it's also the same for the academic students. And I want to see so many Rochdale students not having their horizons limited by their postcode, which is all too often the problem. So Rochdale Sixth Form College is brilliant. It's got a record number of Oxbridge students this year, which is fantastic. So the other week I went to Pembroke College, Oxford, to help them boost their links to Rochdale Sixth Form College. They're taking 2 students from Rochdale this year, which is great, but they've got a record number of offers from Oxbridge, which is fabulous. But also, again, it all comes back to the economy and making Rochdale a better place for business. So Atom Valley, the Mayor's development zone, which is all about advanced manufacturing, is something the Treasurer are really, really keen on, because advanced manufacturing gives us that extra investment and productivity that we need to grow. The reason Britain's been held back for so long is we don't have enough business investment and we don't have enough training and skills, but also we don't have enough productivity. We're not a productive enough economy, unlike some other countries like the US or France. How do we improve that productivity? Advanced manufacturing, technology like your company, Richard, is absolutely central to it. And that's why when it came to just liaising with that Oxford College, I was talking about not just the pupils coming to do their A-levels and then a degree, but PhDs coming to Rochdale at what's hopefully going to be a fantastic new research centre, the Sustainable Manufacturing and Materials Centre, which is in Kingsway Business Park. We're in the process of setting that up and trying to get some academic partners for that. And if the Oxford or Cambridge colleges can send some PhD students there and work with startups in advanced manufacturing locally, brilliant, win-win. That's the kind of thing I'm really committed to. So, yeah, housing, health, education, the economy, they're all the priorities for me. Obviously, the environment too is a really, really important priority for me. And I do believe that net zero is the only option we've got as a planet. There is no planet B. It's absolutely true. And that I find that a lot, not just with young voters, but older voters as well, who believe that we should be doing our best to preserve what we've got. There's far too much that you see in terms of the extreme weather events already, which is costing billions. Again, the economy is damaged by climate change. How much do we spend on flood protection, but how much do we spend after if we don't get the flood protection right? Many billions more than we need to. Same goes for forest fires, same goes for heat exhaustion, and it affects their health, air pollution as well. So it all wraps together. I'm a big believer that net zero is a fundamental growth policy. It's pro-growth because it's industries of the future. And we've got to have sustainable growth in Britain, green growth, which really matters. That doesn't mean you can't have a transition. You need a just transition to that future. That means you do need things like, the Drax power station recently, for example. We made a difficult decision to keep that going because a lot of workers depend on it for their livelihoods. The last government didn't plan for a transition, so we have to keep it going, and we can't. It's 4% of our UK energy comes from one plant, which burns wood. We couldn't get rid of that overnight because there was no plan to get rid of it overnight. So you've got to keep it to keep the lights on. But we're coming to a plan, which is a really decent plan, which will reduce the amount of taxpayer subsidy going to that, insist on high environmental standards, no virgin forest burnt there, for example, and also have a windfall tax on Drax if they produce excess profits on it, which will go back into the UK economy. So that's a good example of how you can do green growth in a just way. Similarly, transiting away from the North Sea oil. We do need oil and gas for the near foreseeable future, but we have to shift away from it, and we have to invest in things like wind turbines and solar and nuclear, to be honest. I'm a big believer that nuclear is one of the main ways we're going to hit our climate change targets. They're very stretching targets, by 2030, making Britain a world leader in having effectively net zero electricity in Britain. It's a big, big challenge. But I think that's what government should be about, stretching yourselves. So all of those things are my priorities. I've probably forgotten a couple. That overall, what I want to do is make Rochdale a better place for business and for everyone who lives here. Everyone loves Rochdale whenever they come here, and I'm a big part of my job is being an ambassador for Rochdale, just like you, Richard. Yeah. You're a great ambassador for the town. And for far too long, we hear bad news stories about Rochdale, negative headlines. But everyone who works here knows what a great place it is. They know what a great community spirit there is, how many brilliant charities there are, how many great businesses there are. The fact it's a place of self-help rather than just giving a handout. There's a really strong work ethic in Rochdale and an entrepreneurialism as well, which is admirable. And the fact that we're the home of the Co-op, we can talk about this in greater detail, is to me something really unique about our place, and it makes me really proud when I go overseas and talk about Rochdale and people know it's the home of the Co-op, and me spreading that message as an evangelist for the town is great because it's a beautiful place to live, as anyone will tell you about the moorland around here. It's affordable compared to a lot of places, and I'm trying to make sure, all these whiz kids in the centre of Manchester come and commute here, and it's 12 minutes from Manchester. Why not? You can work in Manchester if you want to. Preferably work in Rochdale if you can, but work in Manchester, come and have a beautiful life in the countryside in Rochdale, in and around it, with a vibrant cultural heritage we've got. The cultural assets of Rochdale are really important to me as well. Not just the community groups, but the arts heritage we've got. We've got a fantastic artistic community in Rochdale. Again, they're sort of cultural entrepreneurs themselves. They know what it's like to be a freelance. They know how to stand up on your own 2 feet, start your own business. And that's what a lot of artists are like. And I'm doing my best to protect and enhance the culture. Sport as well is really important to me. I think grassroots sport is fundamental to what a community is all about. I'm not just a Rochdale football fan and season ticket holder, but grassroots sport, I'm doing my best to make sure we've got the right pitches, got the right investment in pitches, and that brings me on to the wider thing. The overall package is community cohesion in Rochdale. In a richly diverse area like Rochdale, I'm a big believer we've got a lot more in common that unites us than divides us. And whether it is getting your granny the right healthcare, whether it is getting your grandchildren the right education, whether it is getting the right jobs for the future, all the communities of different types have the common interests, and we should focus on that. And my big job is to make sure that the mainstream of people is respected and recognised, and I talk for them and try and diminish the extremism you see on all sides. And for me, that's a really, really important bit of being MP for Rochdale.
Yeah, look, that's fantastic. Lots to focus on. And look, I love Rochdale. I grew up here. The scenery's brilliant. The opportunity. I went to Greenhill School rather than Alderhill. Yeah. I went to Salford University, which was a great university. And Zen is 30 years old. this year. In 1995, it was a startup business. And together with all my colleagues, we built a business now that employs 600 people.
Amazing.
We're making 120 million turnover. We're the only recommended broadband provider in the UK. So we've won many awards for our service. And Rochdale has been a brilliant place to grow Zen from a little seed to now quite a big business.
No, it's fabulous. I mean, I think you're the oldest surviving internet company in Britain, aren't you? Is that right?
Indeed,
in its original format?
Yeah, we are indeed. Yeah. Let's talk about broadband and move on to a national scale. So one controversial question is BDUK, so the government's £5 billion Building Digital UK fund, a good use of taxpayers' money, or is it a waste of taxpayers' money? So Jeremy Shallow, CEO of Netomnia, said it's a waste of taxpayers' money because free market competition would have built to those rural areas without government subsidy. So why throw taxpayers' money at it when it wasn't needed? And then many other companies, particularly those broadband companies that rely on BDUK for their survival, have built into rural communities, and they make the argument without this system, those communities would have slow, unusable broadband. We've seen the difference it's made. And when I put the question to the audience of the London Internet Exchange, the overwhelming opinion was it's a good idea, but done badly. What do you think, Paul?
Well, it's a really good point. I mean, I think that you've got a duty as a government to spend taxpayers' money wisely. Every penny we spend is not our money, it's taxpayers' money. We have to always constantly remember that. And also make sure, again, the mantra should be not just investment, but efficiency and reform and productivity. So if you've got a £5 billion pot of money, you need to spend it wisely, spend it in the places where it will really make the most impact. And so I think actually both of your audiences have got a point, which is, if the free market can do the job better, and if in some areas, if we just waited a bit longer for the free market to kick in, and it is a very vibrant competitive market, your market, and one of the best things about the market, it shows what's great about Britain. You've got so many entrepreneurs who's setting up companies, providing the competition to the former monopoly of BT, who are actually proving that you can deliver better customer service for people through competition. So making them raise their game, but also having more choice for people. I think that's really important. And if those companies, if we hadn't invested in some areas, then I think there is a case for saying, let's reassess where it didn't work. Could we have done that without spending it in those areas? Could the private sector have done it? But equally, there are some areas where that just won't work. As you say, the smaller altnet providers, it's really important that they were given subsidy and given that chance to thrive. Again, it comes back to this sense of self-help. People don't want a handout, but they just want a bit of support, a hand up. And that's what those companies wanted. They said, look, we couldn't really realistically do it, and the economics wouldn't work without that support. And crucially, in terms of social justice, is what I'm all about, making sure that those rural areas did have a chance to share in the benefits of super fast broadband. It's really important for them to not be excluded from the rest of the country. So I think it's a horses for courses. If there were some areas where this scheme went in its rollout, famous rollout, which was the vermicelli of Boris Johnson, who didn't really seem to understand what the hell he was talking about. If in the butts of that rollout, if it could have been done better, we've got to make sure we look at it and reassess it. And I think that's what we should be doing as a government about every bit of public spending.
Let's move on to AI. So lots of stuff from in the press about AI at the moment. Keir Starmer saying he's going to unleash AI on the UK economy to maximise the benefit for the UK. And so the first question is, what's your view, Paul, on AI, the impact it can have, and particularly from a government point of view, the change in policy that the government might need to focus on to maximise the benefit, but also to cope with the potential societal impact of AI?
Yeah, I think it's important that we still maintain some of the safeguards about AI, but it's also, there's been a sort of quantum shift from the last government to this government in recognising the opportunities of AI. We definitely see that it could be an engine for growth. particularly when it comes to streamlining and making efficiencies for companies. If AI can cut out, and people have already seen this on a practical level from Chat GPT, the latest version, if it can suddenly write you a speech in seconds, or write you or condense or précis a very long document for you in seconds, that's hugely important for productivity for so many companies. Obviously, you've got to make sure it's doing the right thing and it's fed on the right data. Now, there are issues about where those AIs scrape the data from. There's no question. And again, you have to have a balance. My eldest son is a computer scientist. He's studying at University of Computer Science. He's big into AI. He wants to work in it. And that's great. He can see it can power the economy. But another son of mine works in the music, will hopefully work in the music industry, and can see the difficulties for copyright, for creatives in particular, which I do have concerns about. And some AI companies scraping that without actually permission, and how we work out whether there's consent given for that and proper licensing and payment for people's work. The irony is, of course, we've seen OpenAI complain about the rise of DeepSeek recently, the Chinese company, saying that somehow it's pilfered its copyright. Well, maybe that's what AI companies have been doing themselves. But if you can put that to one side, which is the creative issue and copyright, I think that's a separate issue. But the wider benefits of AI are undoubted, and particularly as engines for growth. And I'm really interested in how they can help public services. We've seen in some bits of the NHS, when it comes to some of the data and the diagnostic screening, AI can really make a difference in speeding up how quickly you detect a cancer growth. That kind of stuff is the sort of AI we should be really pushing and promoting. We've got this fantastic resource of the NHS. We need to make sure that the data obviously is anonymised, and that we can make sure we have ultra-safe protections for individuals, patient confidentiality. But within that, we've got a unique system in Britain, which is we do have a national health service. And can we, within that, use AI to not just improve services, but maybe look at patterns of how we do treatments better? And I think there are so many possibilities. And I do admire the fact that we've got a government that wants to not put off AI companies and startups from starting here. We want to attract them. We've got to do it in the right way. But it's quite exciting. It's definitely going to be another industrial revolution, AI. There's no question. You just got to be sensible about how we do it. But in terms of public services, I'm a big believer in digitising public services. That's another area where we can get better bang for our buck for taxpayers' money. Particularly, for example, already the government are planning on doing a digital passport, which would go on your phone. Similarly, my kids, are delighted by that. The one thing I told them recently that the government was doing that they got really excited by was the fact that you could now no longer need an ID, a plastic ID card to get served in a pub, that you could have it on your phone. Dad, that's brilliant. And they're right. Why shouldn't that happen? They're so used to their own data being encrypted on their own phone, their own identities being encrypted. They all use WhatsApp. They know what encryption is. They know they're happy with sharing some of their data and their privacy with some companies in return for getting a free service. They know what that deal is. So I'm a big believer that digitising services, public services in particular, can reap many benefits. They can cut costs, but also, more importantly, make public services easier to deliver and more personalised. And so if you do, for example, go to an airport, why should you have a paper passport in your pocket? Why can't you just get out your phone and scan it? I mean, I think a lot of people are moving ahead of the way governments are. A lot of companies are ahead of the curve. People are ahead of the curve. And there was a big debate under Tony Blair about ID cards many years ago. And I get some of those privacy concerns and civil liberties concerns, but if you do it properly, and encryption really does work, if you've got a Gmail account, that is super encrypted. You've got Google Docs, that's super encrypted. I mean, the chances of anyone getting your data from that are very, very low. If you can do it in the right way, I think we should use it as much as possible. And so AI has a wider picture, but I think digitising services, both of them, we should be embracing.
Yeah. Sounds good. And what about the House of Lords report that came out and criticising, and I guess UK startups getting snapped up by overseas buyers and that weakening the economy? What's your view on that?
Well, we've got to be careful. We should be a home for wanting to make sure businesses want to stay here, And I think the fact that Arm, for example, the chip manufacturer, is a brilliant British company, it was bought out by foreign companies, is a salutary lesson how we should make Britain more of a home, a hospitable home for companies like that. Obviously, in some ways, it's a mark of success that other foreigners want to buy our British firms, so we shouldn't neglect that. It should be a badge of honour in some ways. But as a government, we're trying to, and the last government, to be fair, tried to do more to protect some strategic industries and make sure they weren't able to be bought overseas. I do think that we could be doing a bit more to try and protect them and incubate them. Incubation of startups and really successful ones should be important. We should see things like that as a national security matter, a national sense of pride, really, that we're having British companies staying in Britain.
Changing the subject onto the structure of political parties, I noticed that you were a Labour and Cooperative Party MP.
Yep.
And I didn't even know that you could be an MP for two different parties. I thought you had to pick your party and that's what you did, but clearly not the case.
Yeah,
Tell me a bit about that.
It's very unusual to a lot of people to sort of try and work out what is it being. You're a cooperative MP. You're not just a Labour MP. You're Labour and Cooperative. They're two sister parties. So I'm a member of the Co-op Party and I'm a member of the Labour Party. Obviously, for me, it really matters being a member of the Cooperative Party because Co-op was born in Rochdale, where the birthplace of cooperation, famously. Back in 1844, those, working class weavers got together. Again, a sense of self-help. They didn't want someone else sorting out their lives. They wanted to group together, work out, can we work together? Can we get the right affordable basics that we can then sell on and make a bit of a profit? And when we have a profit, we share it in a dividend amongst each other. There are all sorts of principles about internationalism as well, which was fantastic. And it was that's why it became a global movement really quickly. It spread all over the world because it tapped into something that human beings really are passionate about, which is having something local, an interaction with someone that in your community and helping each other and not relying necessarily on the state for everything. But it was an alternative between the state and the private sector, so to speak, and a sort of nice hybrid model. And I'm pleased the government is big in making sure we double the size of the cooperative sector in Britain. The co-op itself, the cooperative shops that everyone know, is a very good example of a business that believes in ethics, as well as making sure that people get a decent, affordable set of groceries. So I'm a big believer in cooperative movement as a whole. And so for me, believe it or not, I'm the first cooperative MP for Rochdale in its history, which is a bit of a shock. I think they used to have some odd rules about a Labour MP couldn't then become a Labour and Cooperative. So you have to do it right from your first election. But I did it right for my first election. It's really important to me. I evangelise about the cooperative movement a lot. This year is the United Nations Year of the Cooperative. And the reason for that is cooperatives across the world, particularly in underdeveloped countries, are a good route for making sure that communities are resilient, particularly in post-conflict zones. I've just come back from Palestine. I was really pleased to talk to the Union of Palestine Co-ops there, and the link with Rochdale I'm hoping to build, because a lot of agriculture in Palestine, olive growers, shepherds, they're co-ops, and they use their own form of cooperative banking through SMS, text messaging, and often a lot of the women are in charge of the banking system as well through cooperatives. So to me, it's a really exciting form of finance and a form of running your economy. Obviously, you need the private sector as well, but it's an important bit of our economy, a mixed economy. And that's why being cooperative MP really matters to me, because whether it's cooperative energy, which is often local, small-scale energy, why can't we have co-ops running or building wind farms or solar farms or water projects? And then instead of having community benefit, you have community ownership. And I think that is a big difference. It's fine getting community benefit when a big wind farm decides, well, we're going to build a massive number of turbines, and then they'll offer a bit of like a football pitch or something in return. But I think it's much better if the community owns that energy, owns the wind farm, and then gets cheaper bills automatically for people who live nearby. So being a cooperative MP is really important to me. And when I was in France last year and I bumped into, totally randomly in a remote French village, an American senator called Chuck Schumer. who was one of the most senior Democrats in the United States. I think he was like the fourth most powerful politician in the US. I bumped into him and we got chatting, and I said I was from Rochdale. And he said, "Oh, Rochdale," and he said, "We've got there's a famous Rochdale co-op in New York City." And I said, "Really?" And it's the Rochdale housing development, which is north of New York City, and it's called Rochdale because that was started as a cooperative in the 70s. And for him, Rochdale was this great symbol of cooperation, and it's so nice to hear that. And I've got to tell more people about it.
I mean, do you ever get a conflict between the policies of two different parties?
No, because actually they're sister parties. In other words, the Labour Party allows the Co-op Party to do what it does because it's a sort of form of social solidarity, really. It's very distinct from the Labour Party in the sense that it's a different type of model, whereas Labour Party is always not normally associated with state intervention. The Co-op model is different, but it's complementary. And how the Co-op Party started, to be honest, was when this great global co-op movement was on in its ascendancy in the late Victorian times and then early 20th century. They found out in British politics terms in the 1916, 17 and the 20s that they were trying to get what they wanted, but they were blocked in Parliament. They said, "Oh, well, maybe the only way around that is to have a political party of our own." So they started in the 1920s and then merged with the Labour Party, and the rest was history. No, merged in terms of being a sister party.
As well as being passionate about the co-op, I also believe you're a monarchist, and you met the King very recently. And a big advocate of having the monarchy. You're really interested to hear about it.
I strongly believe in a constitutional monarchy because I think it's the best model for a country. Because I think presidential models often are at risk of one individual dominating everything. And we've seen that, let's be frank, in America. We've seen it in other countries. The beauty of a constitutional monarchy is that the monarch respects the political realm of a prime minister and says, right, the politics is yours, but they rise above politics. And I'm a big believer that actually I'm not too tribal when it comes to politics. The only real change you ever get in Britain is when parties agree and there's a consensus, whether it's climate change, whether it's the future of pensions, whether it's social care, whether it's child poverty. The things that matter, and the NHS is a very good example too. When you get a consensus, you get long-lasting change. It doesn't change from government to government. And the reason I like the constitutional monarchy model is because the monarchy rises above the everyday politics. And particularly for the armed forces, I think it's really important to have a head of state who's not a commander-in-chief or as a president. And I think the armed forces like that too. They salute the king. They used to salute the Queen. And for them, many in the armed forces, we talked to them, it really mattered. They weren't constitutionally at the whim or the behest of an individual prime minister. Yeah, a prime minister would have a certain policy. We want to go to war here or there. But ultimately, their loyalty was to the crown. And I think that really matters. Call me old-fashioned in some ways. But and there's a strong Labour tradition for that as well. Clement Attlee, famously, one of our best ever prime ministers, got on incredibly well with King George VI. They had a very close relationship because the king realised there was effectively a revolution in Britain in 1945. Suddenly you had a government that created this amazing thing with the NHS. It nationalised lots of things. But the king said, that's fine. That's what politics is about. But we're still here throughout it all. And he and Attlee had a brilliant relationship because they both respected each other. They did different things. And a prime minister does a different thing from a head of state, from a monarch. And I think King Charles has done lots of great work in terms of he's ahead of the curve on the environment. Boy, was he ahead of the curve. When people were thinking it was a bit nutty, he was there saying, no, this really matters, not just in terms of ultimately climate change, but biodiversity, protecting nature, the natural world, animal welfare. I think there's a lot that the ordinary citizen can see that actually he's done a lot of good on. Interfaith dialogue, he was, again, way ahead of the curve on that. Internationalism. And it's quite interesting to me that actually, he made quite clear he disagreed with Boris Johnson on quite a lot of things on various policies. And it was quite clear that the Queen didn't see eye to eye sometimes with Margaret Thatcher. And she said about apartheid, for example, she made that gently clear. And certainly there's no suggestion that Liz Truss was ever seen as a great thing by the monarchy. So it's quite interesting. I think from the public's point of view, it's quite reassuring that something is not party political and we've got something to hold on to that is about Britain as a whole. You saw the outpouring of grief for the Queen. And that's something really special about Britain, I think.
So you're saying they've got a subtle influence, or maybe not subtle, rather than just being rubber stampers, I guess.
Yeah, and it's the beauty of our system is it is influence. It's rather than direct rule. It's sort of, those private chats every Tuesday night with the Prime Minister and the monarch. They're private audiences that remain private for good reason, but because they're private, they can speak candidly. And all the indications we've got throughout history is that they gently say, "Are you sure you should be doing that?" Or, I think that's really useful because, again, it's ultimately about what the ordinary member of the public thinks. They might think as well, "Are you sure you should be doing that?" I think it's another check and balance on power and parties.
Let's talk about economic growth because there's a lot of focus on getting the UK economy growing faster. My own personal interest in that is this tension between economic growth, GDP growth, of which about 60% is household consumption, but on the other side of things, on the environmental side, already we as a planet are already consuming too much. So we're effectively saying we're striving to consume more. And then the environmentalists are saying, well, hang on a minute, we need to consume less. Arrow's pointing in two different directions. What's your view?
Well, my view is that actually there is another way, which is any economy that relies too much on consumption is not a really healthy economy. A productive economy is one where productivity is high. And that's the route to economic growth, genuine, sustainable economic growth. There's the other point as well, which is that green growth itself is of its nature sustainable. It's long term, and it's about investing in the short term and not flipping from 5-year horizon to 5-year horizon. It's about looking over the 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Like your business, you invest. When you invest in a property or somewhere, you'll sign a 7-year lease. You'll plan set in 7 years or 10-year horizons. Business doesn't work on parliamentary timetables. And I think I'm really pleased that the net zero is one of our defining missions of this government. It's easy to be cynical about it and think of it as all touchy-feely and it's a bit too green and all that, but it's not. It's fundamentally a very hard-nosed economic policy, which is recognising that efficiency and productivity can only work in a green and sustainable way, whether that is making sure we've got energy independence from the roller coaster of gas and oil or international markets that we've seen over Ukraine. Why should we be at the behest of Putin, just as we shouldn't be at the behest of all the Middle East, oil states? Securing our own energy independence, homegrown energy, whether it's nuclear, whether it's solar, whether it's wind, are really, really important, or tidal as well, which we've got a lot more capacity on, given we are an island. We don't do enough on that, in my opinion. I think that making sure you have green growth is the only way to true growth. I genuinely believe that. It's not a slogan. I think we've seen that the biggest economy in the world, the most powerful, successful economy in the world, America, under Joe Biden had the Inflation Reduction Act. What was that all about? It was making sure there were subsidies, but sensible subsidies, into the renewable sector and making sure they could see the future. Why is China investing in it? Because it's an engine of economic growth. China would not be doing it. These countries don't do it. The US and China are the two biggest countries in the world, and the biggest economies. Don't do that out of altruism. They do it out of self-interest. They know that the route to long-term growth is green growth and energy independence as well, and lower bills ultimately for consumer. But I'm a big believer that despite all of that, we've got to make sure that your ordinary voter, your ordinary person in the street, feels the benefits of that green growth. So that means having a just transition from the current situation of dependence on oil and gas, making sure that people are not put out of work too quickly, that actually we allow the green economy to become a job-creating economy. We invest in those skills in, engineering for turbines or whatever, or solar or nuclear, and that we deliver it. Electric vehicles is another good example where we need to make sure the national grid is strong enough to cope for all these electric vehicles that we're inevitably going to have. But making it affordable too. So will it lower your bill if we insulate your house? Yeah, of course it will. But will it lower your bill if we use renewables? And will it iron out those roller coaster of increases in prices, energy prices we've seen far too often the last few years? Similarly, you've got to make sure that driving an electric car isn't ridiculously expensive. Is the more we could be doing about, state-backed interest-free loans for getting people an electric vehicle? Is the more we can do to make sure that when you get charged, you don't get charged VAT on the street for your electricity price? Can you sell some of that electricity back to the grid? There's all sorts of exciting things we can do. But as I say, it's a hard-nosed economic policy to be in favour of green growth. That's why even President Trump has not abandoned a lot of those subsidies under Joe Biden. A lot of the red states, the Republican states, are owning a lot of that subsidy because they know it means jobs in their states. Yeah. So it's really important. And I think, Europe obviously gets it too. The European Union gets it. So we can't be left behind by a few people who misrepresent what net zero is about.
Well, final question, actually, let's touch on the European Union. What do you think about Brexit, the decision itself and the impact that it's had since that decision was implemented?
Well, I'm a Democrat, first and foremost. If people voted for it, you have to deliver on what they voted. The sad thing is, people have not got what they voted for, whether it's migration. A lot of people feel really let down. They thought they were reducing migration, but it's soared, no question about that. And obviously we have to be compassionate about asylum seekers. We have to make sure that you balance both things, that we're a safe haven for people who are seeking refuge from persecution, and that obviously much migration is itself, it gives an electric jolt to an economy. You've got entrepreneurs who've set up their own businesses. But equally, I think in terms of, it again comes back to this point about housing, you need to have the infrastructure ready for migration. So if you have too many migrants, then you're going to really undermine the quality of life for people who, in terms of the school, the health services, the housing. So you've got to have the right balance. And I think, I'm pretty sure that the Home Office are fixed on getting that balance right. But crucially, you need control over it as well. And so I think that actually Brexit has failed on that, and we can make sure we get it right. But there are other things like the economics of Brexit, which were, a lot of people just underestimated the sheer red tape it would create. I was always a bit baffled why a Conservative Party would be so pro a no-deal Brexit, for example, a really hard-line version of it, given that it would increase red tape on your average business who wants to import things. If you're a brickie or a builder, they've got more costs for imports now. Even an old sole trader who's working on Amazon out of their own home selling stuff online, they're finding costs are ridiculous. When it comes to movement around Europe, I'm really pleased that we're now looking at like a youth mobility scheme, and I'm a big believer in. I met a group called Carry On Touring, musicians who want to tour in Europe, making it a lot easier for them. The things we can do to make it a better deal, that we were left with this terrible version of it. But I think that there's no turning the clock back in terms of being back in the EU, because the people have spoken. No, that might change one day, but that'll be up to the people. In the immediate future right now, I can't see that happening. And places like Rochdale, which voted for Brexit, many of my family voted for Brexit. Why? Because they felt they weren't being listened to. And I think that's a lesson for all politicians. If you leave it too late, if you don't listen to people, what they were saying, we weren't being heard, we weren't being listened to in our everyday lives, you were changing party to party and it wasn't making any difference. Then they'll reach for other levers, and Brexit will seem to be a simple solution. It turned out to not be a simple solution. But I do understand why people did it. And they're also, to be honest, I think partly they were voting against austerity at the time, against David Cameron. So I think that was a big factor. So I don't think there's any changing that, certainly not in the short term. But there's lots of things we could do to make our relations with Europe. We're going to have a reset with Europe. There's no question. The Prime Minister said that. We're having closer links, certainly closer security links. There's no question, particularly given what's happening in America. We need to strengthen those ties, help places like Ukraine. We also, to be honest, need to strengthen our economic ties with Europe as well and do everything we can, whether it's there's a thing called the phytosanitary deal, which is all about agricultural goods, reducing the barriers for that, for our farmers, making it less less of an unequal playing field. There's lots of things we can do about, hopefully, in terms of academic sharing. Maybe one day we'll be back in Erasmus scheme, which helps students. Maybe in terms of, we're going there in terms of science funding. But I think we've basically made a decision we're not going back in the EU. There may be at some point a two-speed EU that emerges over the next few years, and we might be part of that two-speed EU, not being part of the EU, but an outer sort of group of countries that have retained their independence. And I do get the constitutional point of a lot of Brexiteers, which is, sharing sovereignty was unacceptable to them. We need to make our own mistakes, our own decisions. And we are making our own mistakes, but they're our mistakes. I get that, and I wouldn't want to countermand that. But equally, I get there's a lot of people who strongly feel like Brexit didn't work for them and didn't work for the country and let down the young people. So what we're trying to do is correct some of the bad bits, while retaining the fact that you've got to respect people's decision.
Fantastic, Paul. Thank you so much. Thanks for making the time out of what I know is a very busy schedule. And thank you very much for watching. And thanks again, Paul, and see you again soon.